the collection of these books. For example, they mention the passage, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." This was in reference to a woman who was an adulteress who was to be stoned. They state quite clearly here, it is not found in several of the older manuscripts of the Bible. The New World Translation of the Bible sets aside the first 11 verses from the rest of the text of John chapter 8. It is given a footnote which shows that the Synectic manuscript, the Vatican MS number 1209, and the Synectic Syriac Codex do not contain these words. And these documents, being the oldest of the documents from the 4th century, have caused the scholars to conclude that these words cannot be attributed to Jesus. Even one of the famous or favorite passages which are used to point to reference in the Holy Scriptures of Trinity attributed to Jesus, in the first letter of John 5 verses 7 and 8, which states, "And the Spirit is the witness, because the Spirit is the truth. There are three witnesses, the Spirit, the water, and the blood. And these three agree." One of the scholars, biblical scholars, Benjamin Wilson, writes, "This text concerning the heavenly witness is not contained in any Greek manuscript which was written earlier than the 15th century. These point to the fact that there are serious discrepancies in the material contained in the Bible. In the New Testament, the Gospel of Mark, though it is considered by the scholars to be the oldest of the Gospels, they have concluded, based on the evidence contained, that Mark himself was not a disciple. And there is question amongst them as to who Mark really was. Some hold that he was the scribe of Peter, and others hold that he was someone else. So the earliest of the Gospels, Mark, is of questionable authorship. And when we go through the other Gospels, what we find is a similar doubt which has been raised as to the validity of the attribution of these Gospels to the disciples of Jesus. In the Old Testament, we find, for example, in terms of contradictions, in the 2 Samuel 24, the numbering, "And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And he moved David against them to say, 'Go, number Israel and Judah.'" In 1 Chronicles 21, the same passage is repeated, the numbering, "And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel." This is a major discrepancy. In one, it is the anger of the Lord. In another, it is Satan. I'm mentioning a few of these because of the fact that quite often the contradictions which are in the Bible are mentioned in a general sense, and Christians mention one contradiction. So, since they usually ask that, save them asking that during the question and answer period, I'm mentioning a few from the Old and New Testament. In 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 6, we have, 20 years old was Ahaziah, when he began to reign. In 2 Chronicles chapter 22, verse 2, in reference to the same thing, we have 42 years old was Ahaziah when he began to reign. Was he 22 or was he 42? In the New Testament, when we compare the genealogy of Jesus from David in both Matthew 1 verses 6 to 16 and Luke 3 verses 23 to 31, we find a major discrepancy. Jesus in Matthew has 26 parents between himself and David, but in Luke he has 41. And when we compare the names, when we put them in two lists, we find that the names vary. They both start off with Joseph, funnily enough described as being the father of Jesus. But then, for example, in Matthew it goes to Joseph's grandfather as being Jacob. And in Luke he is Heli, etc., etc. Back to the Old Testament, in 2 Samuel 24, verse 13, we find, "So Gad came to David and told him, and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies while they pursue thee?" In 1 Chronicles 21, verse 11, we have the same incident. "So Gad came to David and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, Choose thee either 3 years famine or 3 months to be destroyed before thy foes, while that the sword of thine enemies overtaketh thee." In one case it is 7 years of famine, in the other it is 3 years of famine. And the contradictions go on and on. These contradictions go so far as to be in dispute as to who were the 12 disciples of Jesus. The 12 apostles whom Christendom holds in high esteem, in Matthew 10 verses 2 to 4, are different than in Luke 6 verses 14 to 16. Different names are mentioned. So if these contradictions exist in the Gospels and in the Old Testament accounts, we can assuredly say that the Bible cannot be an authentic source for establishing who was Jesus or what was his message. We are left with the Quran. The Quran, the Word of God revealed to the last of the prophets, Muhammad, may God's peace and blessings be on him and on all the prophets, was written down during the lifetime of the prophet himself. Historically, the Old and New Testaments cannot be ascribed to the times of those to whom they were sent or revealed. Furthermore, the Quran was memorized from beginning to end during the lifetime of the Prophet himself and after his time by an increasing number of people. Till today, there exists tens of thousands of people around the world who have memorized the whole Quran from beginning to end. Every year in Mecca and in other Muslim centers, there are contests